by by introducing my colleagues here, and then I will hand over to them to also say a few words of welcome. You would have seen from the invitation that it's a tripartite. How do you say it? Is it a tri marriage? Is it a it's a three in one marriage kind of thing? It's between us and UNICEF with a strong partner, the government of Finland, and I'm happy to introduce Anu to you. I'm sure her profile will show soon on the screen. But Anu is a focal point or the director of evaluation with the government of Finland, and she's worked closely with us going the journey, especially on SDG focused evaluations. I'm also happy to introduce another colleague from a strong partner. Tom Biggs is from IIED, and we all know how much they continue to mobilize the community to support countries to advance the evaluation agenda. So let me hand over to Anu and Tom.
Thank you, George. And ladies and gentlemen, and friends and colleagues, it's really a great pleasure for me to be here today. And we all certainly know why we have gathered us here. So thank you for coming to share this important day with us. Finland, together with UNICEF, IIED, and EVALSDG, we are very proud of the new guidebook, and we are really looking forward how it will be used and how useful it will be. So I'm sure that there are many countries currently planning to evaluate Agenda 2030 at national level, and I assume we all are struggling how to plan, how to mobilize resources, how to commission or conduct, implement, and report evaluation. The guidelines we launched today will help you in all that. It lays out the main steps from scoping, designing, and conducting an SDG evaluation. It's not a textbook, but a practical guidebook. I think that is what we all most needed. When designing an evaluation, you have to keep in mind the purpose of it. Why this evaluation is important, what kind of evaluation results and data are needed, how evaluation processes and results can be used to best support planning, implementation, management, and monitoring to achieve the SDGs. In Finland, we really wished had this guidebook available when we started to design and implement our evaluation. But now we have it, and hopefully it's very useful for all of you. Maybe you are interested in hearing how we ended up here. So I'm really thankful for Ada and Stefano. They really pushed hard Finland to organize a retreat and to share our experiences of our evaluation. I think you have heard many times that Finland was the first country in the world conducting its evaluation on SDGs. First, I doubted a bit, so I said that for my small evaluation unit, it's lots of work, another retreat, another meeting, etc., etc. But finally, we agreed to arrange it, and I'm very happy and I'm very grateful for Ada and Stefano that they didn't given up. I'm not going to the evaluation as such because we have our evaluation team leader, Satu. She's here, and she really made a tremendous work and then conducted the evaluation, very challenging evaluation in 7 months and with very minimal budget, but she will tell you more about it. We were about 20 people in Helsinki from all over the world, from Indonesia to Mexico and from Nigeria to Germany. They were either commissioners, civil servants responsible for SDG implementation, and then we have very lively discussions, and it showed up that 2 days of that kind of discussions were not enough. It was very, very short. But what we decided to continue the discussions and continue to work on this evaluation. And this is how we ended up to have a knowledge brief, and then more ambitiously this guidebook we are launching today. So thank you once again for coming, and for all authors and institutions contributed to success of this handbook. As I said, that I'm not introducing the book because we are going to have a separate panel for that, but it consists of 7 chapters covering guidance from designing to implementation and the use of evaluation results. And it also offers 3 studies or country cases from different regional contexts: Finland, Nigeria, and Costa Rica. Unfortunately, we don't have those representatives in the panel today, but we will hear from them later. And then what will happen after this launch of the guidebook? We are planning to have a workshop, and we are going to test how this guidebook works, and that will take place in Nigeria this May. And then if you have any ideas, and we appreciate very much your feedback and then your guidance how this book best serve the countries planning to do their evaluations. So once again, thank you very much for your excellent work, and thank you for coming. And then I hope on very useful and fruitful discussions this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your introduction, George, and the excellent remarks, Anu. So I'm speaking on behalf of IIED. That's one of the 3 partner organizations that's been involved in the production of this review and also in the series of events. So it feels like a real progression from the Finland workshop that Stefano was involved in organizing to this discussion today, where we have the report available, and then, as you say, to the Nigeria meeting, looking at using the report in a practical context. It's a very logical flow, and I think really is getting to some of the practical actions that I think are really valuable in terms of testing out how this approach can work, how applicable it is in different contexts, and how useful it is as a framework, not as a set of rules, but just as a guide to assist with effective evaluation of the SDGs at country level. I think the report went online this morning on our website, and we just had a forwarded message from our director from an organization in Mongolia working on sustainable fibers, saying this guide's excellent, we'll be looking to use it in our work. So it's got reach already, and I think it's very definitely addressing a need, addressing an area about applying the SDGs and understanding how they relate to a whole spectrum of other decision-making fora and issues, which is necessary because the SDGs are so complex, so broadly spanning, that actually something that helps as a point of reference for thinking about how to make sense of them and crucially apply them in contexts where there are already governance structures, already different interest groups. This isn't coming in a vacuum. So that, I think, is a really important dimension of this guidebook. I wanted to pick up on 3 particular themes that I think will emerge during the course of the day, but just to introduce as critical elements from, I think, from IIED's perspective in the way that we've understood this process, but I think very much resonate with the work that UNICEF, the Finnish government, and the other 2 governments that have been involved up to this point are thinking as well. The first is that idea of country ownership, that the work on sustainable development, the sort of progress towards the SDGs, isn't a sort of model that can be applied from international level and pushed down. It very much has to connect with what already exists at local, regional, national level. It has to plug into the existing capacities for evaluation, but the existing political structures, the existing interest groups, the existing context in which trade-offs are made between short-term and long-term, between economic progress and environmental sustainability, for example, as well as the mutual reinforcement that often exists between those things. So that focus within this construct on country ownership is, I think, vital, and that's a really important strength of the program. And I was very interested to see in the report the reference to Costa Rica's plan to conduct an evaluation focusing on climate and biodiversity, which will also look at the engagement of international donors and external actors in the country and evaluate from the Costa Rican perspective. So again, that as a component of country ownership, I think is really important, that it's for the country itself to determine what are the critical issues and then think about who the key actors are that they need to assess. Similarly, Nigeria looking to realign its statistical department to fit in with the SDGs, so it's addressing and encompassing the range of issues in the SDGs. Again, that's a national decision. It's using the SDGs and saying, what is there within this construct that actually adds value to the data that we're gathering, the statistics that inform our decisions. So again, that for me is the right way around. Is this working? And is enforced by the guide. The second critical element within the guide that I think is worth highlighting is the focus on the principles in the SDGs, more than on the individual targets and indicators. There's a danger in applying the SDGs of thinking we have whatever it is, 100 and something targets and a huge number of indicators. I don't even know the numbers on this. And that every one of them has to be given separate weight, and you gather data for each of them in a kind of a cascade of statistics. And for me, that loses, the danger there is that you're aggregating huge amounts of data, but you're not really helping in terms of making sense of that data. And for me, the focus on the principles within the SDGs really helps to pinpoint the decisions that are embedded in policy choices. So the focus on integration, the bringing together of the range of different facets within the SDGs and thinking about how they relate to one another, where there are trade-offs between issues, where there's, as I say, a short-term or a long-term perspective on those. That's a crucial facet which guides decisions, I think. The focus on universality. This is an agenda for all countries, but also, unlike the SDGs, it's a focus on, unlike the Millennium Development Goals, there's a focus on all people as well, including those who risk being left behind. So again, these are principles which can be translated into key questions to ask in evaluation, key factors to bring into discussion on potential policies. So again, I think that's a key component within this, this framework, which is really valuable. And the third one to flag, and I'll stop in a second, is the focus on politics. I think the SDGs fundamentally are a political construct. They're about value-driven choices. They're about the decisions that need to be taken where there may not be a simple right answer, but understanding complexity, understanding the implications of choices with a multifaceted appreciation of impact is vital. And that's politics for me. So again, the focus in this guide on that, that reality is really important. And I really like the way that the Finnish evaluation was targeted directly at policymakers, that the results were shared with all the political parties immediately before an election, that there was a deliberate attempt to integrate the findings of that evaluation into the political process. I think is a really interesting example to draw on and think about how to apply more widely. So that just leave you with those three: the country ownership, the focus on principles in the SDGs, and the political framing that's vital for achieving progress on the SDGs. And thanks very much, and look forward to the discussion through the rest of the day.
Thank you, Anu, and thank you, Tom. So colleagues, again, welcome to what we hope would be a very good discussion. The three of us have, and our partners, Indran is here, UNDP as well. A few others have decided to go the journey of looking outward. You know, evaluation, usually we look at our programs, but now the emphasis in the SDG era is to directly support countries so they will then lead the process and evaluate their own policies, actions, programs, and so on. And we'll be hearing more of this. The guide is an attempt to put together the experience, the very rich experience of countries that have gone this path, and we look forward to your reflections on what will come from the panel discussions. In UNICEF, we have truly embraced this approach. I'm happy to say that we are involved in more than 25 countries, working with them on this approach. And at the right time, I'll be happy to share more information on it, especially with member states through our board and so on. But that is the new orientation beyond the UNICEF country program of cooperation, how governments advance their agendas. Let me pause here and invite my colleague, Ada Ocampo, who from UNICEF is both the brain and the legs for this initiative, and then we would transition into the next phase of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, colleagues. It's a real pleasure to have you with us this afternoon, and thanks for being with us. Thanks for your time and for your interest in the guidebook. I would like to request that people sitting in this angle probably come to the center. There are a few chairs there, and people at the very back, if they can come a bit forward, so we can have a better setup for the group. Thank you very much. Without further ado, we will start our first session with the keynote. The keynote will be on the main topic that is convening us today, which is evaluation and the SDGs. The concrete topic of the keynote will be making the case for inclusive and dynamic country-led evaluations of the SDGs. And I would like to invite our speakers, Ms. Silvia Salunes Mulder, who is the chair of the Latin American Evaluation Network, RELAC. She's coming all the way from Bolivia. Silvia, a delight to be with you. Please come to the table, and thank you very, very much for your contribution. And my director, George Larrea Adi, that you already heard from him, he will be also joining Silvia. They will do a duo keynote speech this afternoon. Thank you very, very much, George. And I want to take advantage of this opportunity to thank you for the support you are giving to this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada. Colleagues, it's me again. I'm going to be very brief because it's me again. I have a few words in terms of introducing the topic, and then I'll hand over to Sylvia. We have come together, we are reunited in this special event to launch a guidebook. I have it, I've gone through it. For those who don't have it, I have it. I'm told you to come later on. And the title of the guidebook you would see is Evaluation to Connect National Priorities with the SDGs. I've already talked about the current era that we are in, and the need for all of us to join hands. The guidebook indeed has been the result of true partnership with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Finland and IIED, as well as EVALSDGs. In UNICEF, we decided to invest in the guidebook as part of a series of efforts that we are trying to help mainstream evaluation in national agendas, national learning agendas, but more so in the VNRs, what we call the voluntary national reviews. As countries review their progress towards the SDGs, and they engage each other, they learn from within, and then they learn among themselves Usually there are many events in July in New York, the high-level political forum where countries engage. We would like to support in a strong way the use of evaluation evidence, evaluative thinking, as these engagements go on. So the emphasis again is on what in our jargon we call country-led evaluations. Countries deciding to launch a process and learn from what is working and not working, advance the agenda. Incidentally, the theme for this year, the high-level political forum emphasizes these concepts: acceleration and transformation at the level of each country. So again, how do we mainstream evaluation as countries go in that space? And we are supporting a number of countries, as I've mentioned. There are a few messages through our experience and our engagements that I like to emphasize. One is that evaluation of the SDGs is and it should continue to be a shared accountability, meaning all of us partners coming together to help countries unpack what it means, the processes to follow, the right types of work, and then the engagement that goes with it. So far, we have enough evidence, including from EVALSDGs, EVAL partners, that there is considerably limited progress in putting on the table what we call evidence in seeing whether there's progress or not. We know that a lot of the SDG-related reports are based on monitoring information, which is good, which is one piece of the puzzle. But monitoring helps us to understand the what of what is happening. Monitoring usually is not able to help us understand the why of what is happening or not happening, or what could be, or what if, and perhaps even how it could happen. So member states presence here, you receive a lot of reports that tell you the what. Progress in under 5 mortality, the rate fell from X to Y, or the rates in some countries increased from X to Y. The why of that needs to come from the evaluation. And the what could be also, and including, depending on the type of evaluation, elements of the how. So mainstreaming evaluation into national processes and into the VNRs have become very important, especially as the numbers of those engaged increase. So far, there are over 174 countries that have volunteered to present their VNRs. In the current year, 47 countries will be engaged in the process. Last year, another 47 countries were engaged, and the theme was on inequality, inclusiveness, and so on. In 2018, 42 countries were engaged. In 2017, 43 countries were engaged. And the first year when the process started, some 22 countries delved into the issue of no one left behind. So the numbers are not small. The interest is not minor. And how we can come together to support the reflection. It's a moment of reflection for all countries. How we can come together to support the reflection becomes very important. Message number 2, and my colleague Thomas talked about it, that the principles embedded in the Agenda 2020 requires that we use multiple sources of evidence and that we engage in different ways. And again, the guidebook outlines how we could do that. Message number 3 is to the evaluation community ourselves. There is need for more and better evaluation to influence change. The SDG era requires that we do things in a different way. There's a term that we use, or we're using more and more in UNICEF, whether a particular piece of work is influential or not. Whether it was done well, documentation done well, but after everything, only a few people read it. So we put our lives in these reports, in the analysis, and very few people pay attention to them. So the question becomes the how of the way we do our work, and whether we engage people at the right time or not. And the focus of our work, do we focus on processes only, or do we also pay attention to those who are required to be benefiting from the changes that the SDGs are asking for? Message number 4, evaluation has to be addressed both as a political and technical exercise. Again, in framing the questions, in adopting the methods, how do we ensure that country-led evaluations feed into political processes, policy processes, such that change can happen? So the journey has begun, and we have to do more of what has started. We have to collectively work in support of every government and their partners on the ground that would like to reflect on what is working well or not, why, what could change. We have to be there and we have to embrace the challenge. And that indeed is a shared responsibility, it's a shared accountability, and without that, we'll not be able to advance what we are calling the country-led evaluations in support of the SDGs. So that is why I'm pleased to welcome you to this launch. As I said, it's a very good report that we have. Undoubtedly, the book is going to help with a more hands-on approach at the country level if we come together and engage around it. We will, in 1 year, see where we are, if it's working or not. And from July, when we engage many of you again at the high-level political forum, we will see if enough traction is happening. But in the meantime, it's for you to enjoy the panel discussions, engage, and to make our work better. Push us, encourage us also, and support us, because the journey has just begun. Thank you very much. I'd like to hand over to my colleague Sylvia, and I'm sure her resume is going to appear on the screen. She's come all the way from La Paz. She is an active member of the drive to push for more country-led evaluations in Latin America and Caribbean region. I'm not going to say all about you, but Sylvia, over to you now. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you very much, George, for your inspiring words and also challenging words. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here. And yes, I'm Silvia Salinas, currently the chair of RELAC, the Latin American Monitoring, Evaluation, and Systematization Network. I'm an evaluator, and I'm also a Southern activist deeply concerned with the urgency of the changes we need to achieve the SDGs. So I'm going to speak from a bit of a combination of these three roles and perspectives. And I would like to start saying that there are some key words that we use a lot and that are also determinant for me in relation to the discussions about the type of evaluation we need. We speak a lot about transformation, as George also mentioned. We also speak a lot about innovation. And of course, we also speak a lot about collaboration. These are three very important concepts that we acknowledge, but that we sometimes still have trouble to make them happen. So next, thank you. Or do you want me to? Okay. Oh, sorry. Just which one? Okay. Okay. I think it's very interesting, and I was mentioning it to Ada, that we start to use some kind of, we say, last names to the concepts. Like now, it's not enough to speak about evaluation, we have to speak about transformative evaluation, because if transformative evaluation is needed, then the understanding is that there is some evaluation that happens and is still happening that does not contribute to transformation. So when we start to, in more words, to explain the purpose of what we aim at, what we want, it is something also very important to reflect what is really happening. So I think it's very important to start mentioning that transformative development means different things to different people. And sometimes we use words thinking that we shared a common understanding, but many different understandings can be behind. So it is very important to know what we are all meaning by transformation, for example, and transformative development and transformative evaluation. So sustainable change is not a sufficient condition. The magnitude, quality, timeliness, and relevance of the different types of change matter to making human lives meaningful for all humans, and also to accomplish the no one left behind mandate, which is very, very important for the whole world, but I dare to say very or more important even so in a region, my region, that is the most unequal region in the world. So I think this is a very, I think, challenging and inspiring map that shows us the different types of existing evaluations and that allows us to make some very important distinctions between the type of change from what is called an incremental evaluation to a transformational or transformative evaluation. So I will not go through all the different aspects considered in this map, let's say, but it is very important to acknowledge and to use and to make an analysis of the role of evaluation we are aspiring and the real impact it has on transformation. So if we want transformational development, if we want to achieve the SDGs, we need to move really fast and really seriously to transformational approaches in evaluation that question the power structures, that are open to experimentation, that are able to visioning and experimenting, and that are also open to recognize failure as part of moving forward. I think, and this is my personal bias, innovation is also a very, very strong word, and we need to challenge questions and open spaces to discuss the ways we have been doing things and the ways that have not brought us very far or fast enough and far enough to transforming the state of the art. So I think it is a moment not only to talk and to discuss about innovation. I just had an experience. I was very excited because there is a university that is called the Innovation University in Santa Cruz, another city in Bolivia. So I was very curious and excited and started looking for the university. Nothing about this university is innovative. So I think there are these kind of words that we like to use because they are part of the trend and they look good. But I think we need to discuss further. We need to discuss, for example, what is innovation in relation to development? It's not only doing new things or more creative things. Creativity is part of it, but innovation needs to be deeply transformational, to be really to be meaningful and to contribute to development. So innovation has the challenge to improve effectiveness, to improve relevance, to improve efficiency. So I think it's also important to acknowledge that the next decade of the SDGs is happening and will happen in a time of VUCA, which is a time, an era that is described because, or that is known and that we are experiencing because of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So how are we going to face, in terms of managers, commissioners, all the evaluation system, as evaluators, how are we going to face VUCA times, and how are we going to challenge ourselves to achieve the SDGs in such a complex and difficult time with extra challenges? Just a reminder, this is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the four main decomposition. One is the declaration with the vision, the shared principles and commitment, a call for action, a change of the world. The SDGs as such, the 17 SDGs. Then the follow-up and review, which is a very important part, and the implementation, the means of implementation and global partnership. I think that some of the particularities of the SDGs that are very important to take into account, that are opportunities, but at the same challenges, and that actually I have brought up from a discussion that we had in Bolivia last year. Which are the differences, which are the particularities of the SDGs? It's their focus on human rights, the opportunities for civil society engagement, and now I'm speaking from my side as civil society, as evaluator. I think the process to establish the SDGs was very participatory, but I feel, and that's my experience, but that I think is happening in many, many countries in the region, if not all, is that now there is a vacuum. There is a question mark on how civil society can really get engaged in implementing, but also in following up, in evaluating the SDGs. I think civil society, even the regional BOPES as RELAC, have been left outside or cannot find their role really contributing in this process. Of course, the No One Left Behind mandate, the greater role of the private sector and the alliances, which is also a challenge. It is a one-time, it is something very new, but it is a very important challenge too. The attention to subnational levels, I think that it will be interesting to see how the guide, the book that is being launched, has a meaning and can connect to subnational realities. And also the emphasis on, of course, environmental sustainability. I think this is also an important year to connect our reflections and the guidebook and the challenges to embed the SDGs and to connect national priorities and the SDGs is the EVAL 2020 agenda, which is going to be evaluated, and we are going to be defining a new agenda for the next period. And it is important to ask ourselves and question about what has happened and what has not happened, and of course why, to understand in terms of the enabling environment for evaluation, the individual capacities for evaluation. I can just tell you, for example, in Bolivia, we don't have any academic program to become an evaluator. It's inexistent. So we are, in a way, how do you call it, self-made, or we have to study abroad, or we have to just learn by experience. Also the institutional capacities, of course, and from a systemic approach, and also the interlinkages between these three aspects. Now I will talk a bit about evidence, which is, of course, a main issue and concern for us as evaluators. And I think this is a very challenging quote, and really left me thinking. It's that evidence cannot take us in new directions if we limit evidence collection to what we are already doing. So how can we combine, collecting evidence of what we are already doing with anticipation? So this is also important to think and connect about what is the value of evidence and evaluations. I think evidence is one of another word that is being used a lot, without necessarily having discussed what is really evidence. What is the difference, or is there a difference between information and evidence? We use the word, it's a very strong word, but I think sometimes it's a very fragile or very weak. There is no real substance or arguments behind the word. So there are four different roles, or yes, arguments to highlight the importance of evidence and evaluations. One is the guidance for scaling up. I think scaling up is a major challenge in the next decade. But I think it is also something that we are not really clear or necessarily clear about what it means and how it will happen. How do we scale up models? How do we scale up? How do we move from a successful, nice, small experience to policy making, for example? Inspiration for policy and program innovations. I think this is also very, very important. However, sometimes, and I'm known for being optimistic and positive person, but I was also impacted a few years ago when we had a workshop with James Prostel, who lives here in Massachusetts, and he works about the distance between information or evidence and policy decisions. And he was very challenging about and questioned us a lot and gave us many examples about how policy decisions are frequently made that have nothing to do with evidence. So I think this is a subject that we still need to address, how to bridge the gap between evidence, between evaluations, between even research in a broader terms and policy decisions. The third thing is how evidence and evaluations are very important to strengthen the relevance and quality of national programs and policies. The same reflection and on how this policy decision making are made. I'm currently evaluating the maternal mortality observatory in Bolivia, and they have an agreement with the ministry, and they have produced a lot, in terms of knowledge and discussions, but there has been really no connection between all this knowledge, this substantial knowledge, and the policy decisions. And finally, the information, of course, of what works and what does not work and why, understanding why it does not work. These are some of the key challenges and maybe also limitations that in terms of evidence, and I will just quickly go through them. Some are more obvious than others. Quality and quantity. I think that we face sometimes challenges in terms of weak, but not only weak, but insufficient and unavailable evidence for accelerating achievement and reporting to the SDGs. One thing that was discussed in an event in Bolivia was that evaluation is not seen as a public good. We really have difficulties to access to evaluation of public policies. The second thing is access, that has to do with my previous comment. The third thing, which I think is one of my newest passions, is the issue of averages. In countries with very profound inequalities, averages can bring very misleading conclusions. There is a small paper on what exactly this point in relation to maternal mortality and the misleading conclusions that you can have, for example, about a country like Argentina. I will just use one that has an excellent report, an average in global terms, but that you can see very, very high some of the regions present very, very, very high maternal mortality rates. The other issues are related with disconnections between the different sectors, the lack of really basic coordination, the term of capacities. I just told you what is happening in Bolivia, and it has to do with all the dimensions of capacities that are addressed in the Agenda 2020, and also the whole issue of scaling up, and that is seldom based on forward-looking and substantial evidence. This is my last slide, and I wanted to share last year we did a survey in the region, and 15 countries participated, so we were very very happy with the number of responses. The survey was on national priorities, SDGs, and evaluation. And then we have a small publication in Spanish, and I think we just translated it to English, that asked about what were the enabling and the inhibiting factors to connect these dimensions. And the enabling factors were the existence of legal mandates for evaluation, institutional structures for evaluation, international cooperation supporting the strengthening of an evaluation culture, the existence of academic programs, and the political will, maybe as one of the most important ones. And the inhibiting factors were cultural aspects, thinking about macro-cultural aspects, but are also related to the lack of culture in evaluation, of an evaluation culture, which was one of the main findings in a diagnosis that we did in Bolivia. Insufficient public resources for evaluation. It's not seen as an investment. It's not seen as a priority. There is this idea that evaluation is done for international cooperation, and it's led and even designed and understood in terms of international cooperation. Lack of political will to apply evaluation systematically, a lack of professional trained for evaluation, and precarious results management. So thank you very much, and I hand over to George to complete the duo assignment.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. You've shared very rich thinking for us. And I'd like to build on a few words that you've put on the table. We need to come to terms with what the word transformation means for ourselves and for the countries that we are so keen on supporting. And it's true that it's become a buzzword, it's become a jargon, and everybody's throwing it around. The same as innovation. At the end of a process called innovation, we end up with the same product or the same way of doing things, apart from it being maybe digitized. So again, it's for us to reflect on. The same as collaboration. And again, in evaluation, how do we balance our norms with the need to engage country partners in advancing country-led evaluations when it's about what they are leading on. I like to also think that the notion of not just the problems that we are dealing with now or the past, but the future is even more important. The 2030 agenda has a decade more left. And if we just focus on the past without coming with our tools to anticipate the future and looking at what could be done, we might not be meeting the needs that governments have. How could I do better? How could I do more? In what ways will I achieve more results given the resources that I have? And of course, building on my progress in the past. And it calls for different ways of understanding notions like scaling up. So again, you've put forward important concepts, and I'm sure this will show in our next session. Once again, the opportunity is here for us, and we say we embrace the challenge. We would like the VNRs that will come in July, at least a good portion of them, to reflect thinking beyond monitoring data, meaning go into the whys, hows, and so on. So the journey is now February. We're already working with some countries, but I think collectively we can do more. So thank you.
Call upon Stefano Del Rico, who is one of the main authors of the guidebook that will be with us today, sharing why the guidebook and why it contains and why is it important, what do we expect out of it. I would also like to call Sato Latinoja. If I am not pronouncing your family name correctly, I'm sorry. She is from Demos, Helsinki. She is also a co-author of the guideline, but more importantly, also she played a lead role in conducting the national evaluation of the SDGs of Finland. And as it has been mentioned, Finland is the first country that has completed SDGs evaluation. I want to clarify that Nigeria has already started and is in the data collection process of 2 evaluation of the SDGs, SDG 3 and SDG 4. So Nigeria is not planning to conduct, is already conducting 2. With great ownership and great participation. I would also like to call upon Kasem El Sadiq, Vice Chair of EVALSDGs, and he's also happens to be a co-author of the guidance as well. And with us also we have Fraser Relikin from IDRC Canada, who has agreed to be a commentator of the guidance. Fraser, thank you very, very much. He has nothing to do with the crafting of this guidance, but he has agreed to be a commentator and will be calling upon you when the time comes. So we will start. I hope everybody has received the guidance so far. We are very, very happy with the discussions that have happened in the previous panel. And I would like to connect it a bit from what is going to happen now, but to put it in perspective, I think that to have this deadline of 2030 gives us the energy and the commitment, the renewed commitment to carry on. And that implies being optimistic, being truthful, etc. But also implies that we still believe that evaluation can influence the new narrative we need for development. It's not that if that new narrative doesn't come, well, evaluation doesn't have a role to play. I do think that evaluations have the potential to truly influence the need for a new narrative and to influence when that narrative is to be crafted and shaped. It's not just to evaluate what happens and communicate findings. We need to be influential, and because we believe in that, we think that evaluation can greatly contribute as an agent for change in the context of the 2030 agenda. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Stefano Del Rico. As I said before, he's one of the key authors of this guidebook, and not only is he one of the key authors, but has been the person that has been leading the process of engaging the co-authors and engaging the organizations that we are involved in this guidebook to come together and to reach agreement and to make sure that this end product will come to an end, and we are delighted to see this product with us today. So Stefano, tell us a little bit why this guidance and why it is important and what do we expect out of it. Over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, so I've got a few slides, but
you need to be close to the mic.
To the mic. Okay, yes, of course. Can you hear me now? Great. Yes, maybe a bit too close now. So the guide has been a big journey together with many partners, and I'm delighted today to be here with so many friends and colleagues and to see this product coming together really. And I think, one thing that I would love to come out from the guide is actually the story of the journey that we have done together, but also the stories of 3 different countries, very different ones, and of the many experiences that have been brought by so many people involved. So I would like just to start to say that to achieve Agenda 2030, the big question mark is about national priorities and how they connect with the SDGs, right? And And in evaluation, that question really means, how do we know if we are on the right track? Now, one way to answer that question is to say that we have 169 targets, 232 indicators, which in fact are 244, and 17 goals. Now, when a decision maker looks at that as a headache, really, and think of how can we actually do this to make this work at our national level. And I think, evaluation can help to actually address that question. How do we know if we are on the right track? Of course, indicators, targets, statistical capacities are extremely important. But as has been said by others before, they are not the only solution. But even in evaluation, the answer to how do we know if we are on the right track is we don't know. Nobody knows, really. Because these are big questions, and to answer these big questions, we need actually many minds, several attempts, perseveration, and actually people who are not afraid to fail. I don't think that anybody can actually claim, this is how evaluation should be done to address the SDGs. Okay, what we could do is to actually come together, discuss, and try different approaches, which work in different places. So the guide is actually the result of the work of 40 civil servants, evaluation professionals, and many others who have contributed, but it's also the logical consequence of the work that we have done with other partners before. We've published something all together as a community of practice, 14 knowledge products so far, with EVALSDGs, the Independent Evaluation Office of UNDP, the Independent Evaluation Group of the World Bank before, and many others. So is this guide the final response? And no, it isn't. It isn't. It's rather a contribution which aims to move us forward because, as it's been said before, the clock is ticking. And we have only 10 years ahead to reach our big deadline, 2030. And the world is on fire. And then the big question is, how are the SDGs going to have an impact at all on this world? So when we started this journey together in 2016, Agenda 2030 was just being signed, and it was actually marking a big difference with the MDGs because it was recognizing the complexity of the real world. And it was a big difference for us in our little community, for our humble role, because actually it was recognizing the role of evaluation. But as we know, words in international agreement can easily become empty slogans which don't have any impact. To have an impact, we need to give meaning to words with actions, and that is what our partners have done. Finland, Costa Rica, UNICEF, EVALSDGs, Costa Rica, and the VAL, to mention so only the ones that have contributed to this. The big theories and frameworks alone don't change the world. Concepts alone don't change the world. Practice does change the world, but it can change the world in a bad way if it's not guided by self-reflection and critical thinking. So in 2016, country-led evaluation was only a concept, and now a few early adopters are transforming these ideas into something that decision makers can use. This guide is actually built on the practice of those early adopters and aims to provide commissioners and evaluators with tools for thinking through the challenges posed by sustainable development. To take seriously sustainable development, we cannot avoid the difficult questions and the difficult choices. A more green economy means disruption of previous economic patterns. Lifting people out of poverty means considering the environmental cost. Adapting to climate change implies reflecting on different future scenarios, which implies actually going beyond not only 1.5%, but even 3%, and 3 grade Celsius degrees beyond pre-industrial level. Which means actually, if we go beyond 4, it means serious challenges to human civilization, and these are not unlikely scenarios, are scenarios which are considered by UNFCCC, not as the most likely, but they're not so unlikely also because we don't know what's going to look like the future. So taking sustainable development seriously means making difficult choices. So evaluation is a tool to generate dialogue around evidence, which should help to mediate contrasting values and interests. And in the guide, what we are trying to do is just to give simple messages which come from lessons learned in different experiences. So the first thing, which has been said many times, so I don't need to repeat it now, but evidence use is the king. If evidence evaluation is not used in policy making, there is really little place for us. We don't do actually, we don't answer big questions. We don't do research on high philosophical questions. What we do is to try to actually influence policies. So we have to actually find the right way to speak to decision makers. Probably we have not found the right way. And I think, we should actually ask that first ourselves. How do decisions work? How can we actually influence? How can we engage with the agenda of decision makers early enough to make that influence? The second point is define the scope and focus through participatory approaches. Implementing the SDGs will inevitably create winners and losers. SDGs implementation can't always be a win-win. It's not a rosy picture. And this is why dialogue is needed to overcome the challenges and to make the difficult choices. Eventually, evaluation helps to establish which values we want to use to make decisions. And of course, those are political choices, those are national choices, are local choices, but at least the decision is made transparent, is based on evidence, and is based on the different value and interest groups. The third point is that currently we are really missing the forest for the trees. Too much focus on all the indicators, too much focus on the targets. So we thought it's good actually to make a step back and think about what are the principles that underpin the Agenda 2030. How can we draw some useful questions that we can address in our evaluation or can inform the evaluation criteria? So in the guide, you will try some questions that we have brainstormed all together as co-authors, but of course those are just prompts, are inputs. So you're really encouraged to come up with new questions that actually respond to those principles. And finally, another key point is to think about the logic which underpins national policies. Because to know whether we are on the right track, we need to think how we get there and what are the impact pathways that we think are going to help us to get there. So, final word, this guide is really about an approach which is built around the core principles of Agenda 2030. And we hope that it's going to help to look at your own national context, your local realities through the lenses of sustainable development. And as I said, you won't find, ready-made tools or evaluation methodologies. There are plenty of them out there. What you will find, though, is how you can actually come up with your own solution which respond to sustainable development. There are also some methodological suggestions about what has been used before, but again, it's a tool for commissioners and for evaluators to actually build on their own experience using the eyes of sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Stefano. I think you, in a very brilliant way, have walk us through the journey, but also to the context and to the challenges. And you have been very clear about that this is a guidance, therefore there are borders. So a guidance is not the solution on how to do things, but it's just a reference that if smartly adapted can be very useful. And that is the purpose of this guidance that I am sure it's going to be very useful. There is already lots of expectations in countries, and we are also looking forward, as Anu has mentioned, to pilot it soon in Nigeria with various country representatives. I think it's now the turn to listen to the co-authors that have been involved in this process. And I would like to ask Anu, in her capacity of co-author of the guidebook, Asatu, sorry, when Anu smiled, I realized my mistake. Thank you, Anu, for being soft but influential. Satu, in her capacity of co-author of the guidance, but at the same time of team leader of the evaluation of the Sustainable Development National Plan that has been completed for Finland, an evaluation that has demonstrated to be extremely influential. So can you give us your thoughts and key messages? Thank you very much, Satu. Over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and also apologies. I have a little cold and a voice a bit down, but I'm sure we'll manage. So a lot of wise words said already today. I have 3 lessons learned from the Finnish SDG evaluation that was published last year and that I was leading. Our policy brief is on the back table. It's a 4-pager with light blue color. You can have a copy of that. That was meant for the policymakers. And then we have a longer 80 pages report then available online. There's also a link to that report in the policy brief. And I have to say I would have been very happy to have such a guidebook when we started the work, as the topic was really broad and complex. So we actually did all the 17 SDGs, so the whole sustainable development policy evaluation. It was really, we had quite struggles when doing that. Luckily now when I was listening to Silvia, I realized that perhaps our evaluation was transformative evaluation. We didn't know the word or the method by then, but I was relieved to see similarities in our work. So Demos Helsinki is an independent Nordic think tank working towards fair and sustainable societies. We work with the topics you see here. I work a lot with sustainability issues, but for example, issues related to governance innovation are also very close linked to the topics we have here today. So I believe, and I also have evidence that a good evaluation, with a good evaluation, it is possible to achieve progress, but you have to be able to ask the right questions. And here this guidebook can be very helpful. There are long lists of possible questions to choose from, and actually all my 3 points are also more like questions than answers. The first point is linked to this theory of change. So why do we actually work with SDGs? How do we believe that this change to sustainable or to sustainability will happen in our societies? And what is actually the added value of sustainable development policy when we have several sectoral strategies already happening? So climate change, circular economy, equity, better housing, you name it. In our case, the added value is that sustainable development really brings these questions of ecological and social sustainability to the same table. It brings us to discuss about the topics of just transition to carbon neutral society as an example. And this is why we use this donut model also when communicating this to our policymakers. So how do we ensure that we have this good social foundation without overstepping the planetary boundaries? And this actually our policymakers understood better than the 17 goals, which are everything. But when we said that, look, this green donut is where you should aim to go, this should be the target, the message was already more clear. It was also interesting to realize that no country is yet on a track for achieving all the 17 goals. This picture shows that countries on this lower left corner have still a lot to do with the social goals, but are still within the limit of 1 planet. Whereas the countries on the upper right corner have most of the social goals already achieved, but are struggling with their too big footprints. So it's super important to find these right topical areas where your country needs to prioritize in order to reach this corner of humanity's sweet spot where none of us is not yet. So this could be also part of this new narrative of development. So SDGs are actually saying that all the countries are developing countries because none of us is yet there. The second point is about policy coherence. Is what we are doing here in line with what we are doing there, or are there actually contradicting policies? This is just an example from Finland. Finland started to include estimations on sustainability in the budget proposition last year for the first time, and it showed that Finland advanced carbon neutrality with 1.5 billion euros, while at the same time around double amount of money was paid to environmentally harmful objectives. And this was really good results also of an evaluation. So to bring these kind of issues visible makes it then possible to look for the next steps to improve our policy coherence. Third point is about this transformative policies. Are our policies transformative enough? And do our governance models support long-term policy making and transformation in the sectors where we know that rapid transformations are needed? And if not, how can this capacity be added? This was also asked from the scientific community in September last year when this report, this Global Sustainable Development Report, was published. So there is a call for several systemic level transformations that are needed: energy systems, our cities, our food systems, and so on. I'll finish with a little advertisement. So Demos Helsinki is working with public sector innovation topics actually all over the world. So if you are interested to talk more about this, either SDG implementation or governance innovation topics, I'm happy to talk also more later today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satu. I think this has been a very, focused way of sharing lessons of a very important evaluation, not only because it's the first one, because it's an evaluation that, as I was mentioning to Shiv and to Nancy, who are conducting an assignment for UNICEF on influential evaluation, this to me is an example of an evaluation that was conceived with a clear intent to be influential, and that has influence in the way that Satu has mentioned, but it also was a plan to influence the pre-electoral debate, and it actually did. So thank you very much, Satu. Those lessons were really, really important. and I'm sure that there are some questions coming out of your presentation. Thank you very much. Now the turn is for my friend and colleague Kasem El Sadiq. Kasem is here, he wears various hats, but today is here with two hats, co-author of the guidebook and vice chair of EVALSDGs. Kasem, would you like to share some messages with us today?
Yes, I'll be happy to do so. But before that, let me thank the organizers and all the partners around the table today. And again, remind myself and everybody of where I'm coming from. I'm coming from EVALSDG. And EVALSDGs is a network, is one of Eval Partners networks that has a clear mandate of promoting the evaluation of the SDGs, and it's a network of practitioners, of government officers, of parliamentarians, among others, who are engaged in the evaluation of the SDGs. Probably a couple of things that I'd like to draw, and these are mostly okay. These are mostly kind of main areas of focus for EVALSDG to take forward. But before that, probably it would be worth mentioning that the guidebook is timely in a sense that it comes, though after 5 years of the kickoff of the Agenda 2030, but guess what, we still have another 10 years. And it came at a culmination of a series of questions around the how to do so. Throughout the partnerships we've held with partners, we've published and we've produced a couple of knowledge products around the policy-oriented briefing notes, and they kind of address the mostly policy pointers. Today, we're shifting tracks from policy pointers to cookbooks and guidebooks and most kind of tools that would help commissioners, evaluators, managers, and officers to develop their evaluation of the SDGs. And this is quite an interesting shift, which respond to a need. And the demand to vis-a-vis the how, the question of the how that Shiva probably earlier in the earlier session pinpointed at. As a network, I think what we'll do is we will be promoting the importance of the principles of the SDGs, and at the same time we want to engage with stakeholders to create kind of a balance between a criteria-based and principle-based evaluation. To a large extent, most of the evaluations that have been conducted so far are criteria-based. And recently, we've held quite an interesting discussion through a webinar that was scheduled last month with the evaluation head of DAC team. And one of the concluding remarks, or probably a consensus that the participants reached, is that there is a need probably to kind of integrate the SDG principles within the new era of evaluation, rather than to stick to the criteria. With all the appreciation and acknowledgement of the shift or the revision of the criteria, while including coherence basically to the earlier 5 criteria, but we think that principles like the equity, resilience, environmental sustainability, universality, accountability, and the principle of leaving no one behind are crucial and critical to not to be left behind in any evaluation of the Agenda 2030. A third takeaway, or a third area of focus would be to promote the guidebook among the various membership of the network and beyond, to ensure the concept of country-led evaluation that George has alluded to earlier in his keynote speech. And it's a critical, basically, again, not only to get stuck into the evaluation per se, coming at the last moment of the program, policy, and projects, etc., but rather to try to influence policy making and the programming. And to a large extent, this is quite reflective strongly in the guidebook, where we've highlighted the cycle, the policy making cycle, and addressed key areas and entry points along the agenda setting phase, along the engagement with stakeholder phase, among others, to highlight the importance of integrating or infusing evaluation, evaluative thinking throughout the process of policy making and decision making, let alone the program cycle, etc. The fourth point probably would be, and we've been, as EVALSDG, we've been with support with UNICEF and other partners also quite active on influencing the high-level political forum on ad hoc as well as on a direct basis. And in this regards, we would aspire to influence the VNR processes, again, to shift and to shift them into more inclusive, transformative, and policy and principle-oriented and principle-based, rather than again get them stuck into the criteria-based evaluation. And finally, we claim and we walk the talk basically by contributing to knowledge production, and the new era or the new wave of our knowledge production would focus on better scoping and framing and focusing evaluation in the context of the agenda, and a couple of tools that within the network have been developed, the insights, the policy briefs, the spotlights, among others, would be quite interesting tools to use in this shift of focus. The one last comment I'd like to draw is that I mean, we're driven as network with the EVAL agenda, and the EVAL agenda has focused mostly to a large extent on the institutional as well as individual capacity, and we strongly believe that this guidebook would contribute toward individual capacity building of commissioners, evaluators, and managers, as well as institutional capacity building of all those who are engaged in the evaluation of the Agenda 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Kasem. This was clear, strong messages, very well articulated. I would just like to, as wearing also my hat of EVALSDGs, say, well, probably we're still inside of EVALSDGs. We need to discuss where we are shifting focus or we are diversifying the focus, because it's important that we continue with the policy dialogue. Sometimes it's important to have really technical discussion, but we cannot deny the fact that we are weak in terms of intervening and influencing policy dialogue, in being able to talk with policymakers in a way that we will be part of the dialogue and not just on technical discussions that will probably pull them away. Well, there are many things, many questions and answers, but before giving the floor to the audience, a very interesting part of this session is to have an independent commentator, a person that has not been involved in the development of the guidance. So I would like to call upon Fraser, really keen, from IDRC, Canada, who has kindly agreed to be our commentator this afternoon. Fraser, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for staying till the end. And thank you to the organizers, UNICEF, the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, EVALSDGs, and IIED for the invitation, but also this initiative. I think this guide is an excellent resource for everyone who cares about evaluation. As was noted, I'm in the Policy and Evaluation Division at the International Development Research Center. And I'm happy to say that evaluation has always been a central tenet of the way that we work. Putting a strong emphasis on accountability, monitoring progress in the programs that we run, on making sense and adjusting, making course corrections, using evaluation for those means, but also learning. This, as the speakers have mentioned, this comes at a very timely moment, even 5 years in. I was involved in a previous job. For 8 years, I worked at the Canadian Council for International Cooperation. And one of the initiatives that we led, and it's going to be seeing a fourth iteration, was a report called Progressing National SDG Implementation, in which we evaluated, now I think in its fourth year, it will be over 120 voluntary national reviews. And the new report is coming out at the end of the month, and it still signals, that there's progress among countries in the selection of targets and indicators and data availability. So we're moving forward on that front, which is encouraging, but there's still not enough integration of key stakeholders into monitoring and evaluation processes, and that there's still gaps in terms of capacity at the country level in terms of conducting these evaluations. I think a message that we've heard echo throughout the day. As I mentioned, this is a useful guide, a useful addition to our thinking around the SDGs. And I just wanted to highlight a few areas that I thought were in particularly useful. Many of you have already mentioned the principles. I've been very frustrated in conversations in Canada when talking about the SDGs, even at one board meeting of my former organization, declaring that people are talking way too much about the SDGs, which was met with looks of shock. But it's because my point was that we don't talk enough about the more transformative 2030 agenda, the elements of leaving no one behind, of integrating. This is the shift that we need to see. Those are the elements. Everyone can relate to one particular SDGs, but unless we change the way of doing things, we're going to be in the same situation 10 years from now. So really happy to see the principles of the 2030 agenda reflected in this evaluation guide, and not just thinking about the SDGs and the targets and the indicators. I'm also really happy to see the way that you've thought about how we can integrate evaluation into systems, into policy processes, into national plans, into budgets, into voluntary national reviews. This is really where the rubber hits the road, and that's the ambition, I think, of evaluations, is to inform those processes. I also liked that we're thinking beyond just national to regional to subnational levels. I would add maybe even to really local community level thinking. I might add in Canada, there's an organization that brings together community foundations. It represents, I think, 80 or 90% of the community foundations. And they do an annual evaluation of the health of their local communities done by local municipalities and community foundations. So it can happen at all levels. And then finally, just on kind of the elements I really liked, and others have also mentioned this, the fact that you're thinking about communicating out the findings of evaluations and what you've learned. That's an essential piece that we need to ultimately think about the end users and how we're communicating the findings to those end users. So those were the pluses, and I wouldn't say I necessarily have strong critiques of this, but rather I think when we think, and you're just launching version 1.0, but when you think about version 2.0, other elements that you might want to think about. And I have noted well that there's still very mixed capacity in countries to do evaluation. And so, take my comments perhaps with that in mind. But perhaps I think what struck me in reading this was a quote in the report talking about the Finnish experience, where it says, "It also revealed that policymakers rarely use sustainable development research findings and indicator data when formulating policies." Again, this is something that everyone has talked about. How can we shift from research or from evidence or from evaluation findings into use? This is something that IDRC has been thinking about since its founding 50 years ago. And we're very much focused on research to action and how we can go about doing that. And I think it's something that applies equally to evaluation. How can we get evaluation to action? And so in that vein, one of the pieces that in our next 10-year strategy, which we'll be launching in April, where we're placing more emphasis is on knowledge translation. A bit of a buzzword, but essentially it's about synthesizing the findings and the learnings from our research, disseminating those and having exchanges and discussions with end users around their findings. But I would argue that this isn't enough, and I think this will be the very minimum that we want to do at IDRC, and maybe something for the evaluation community to think about. It's already there. John's talked about it in that ideal scenario. I think you want to do it, but we're going to be exploring, doing a study of 30 to 40 of our research projects over the past 3 years, looking at the extent to which they have used an integrated knowledge translation approach, which is a much more collaborative approach to doing research. And it takes the assumption that end users, when involved in shaping the research, are more likely to use it. They are the experts on the topic, they have the knowledge of the context, and they have the power to implement the change. And so what from our experience has been our experience around integrated knowledge translation, where moving beyond just sort of dissemination and discussion of research findings, how can we integrate end users into shaping the process, into shaping the research questions, the methodology, collecting data, interpreting results, and disseminating findings. Now, we don't yet know the extent of that. The literature, I think, on knowledge translation and shifting it into real action and policy impact is thin. And so we want to use this opportunity to look at integrated knowledge translation, to look at some of our research projects and see, okay, you know, is the assumption right? And what are the enablers and what are some of the challenges to actually making that happen? So I think that's something that maybe in evaluation you could think about. How can we think about integrated knowledge translation into evaluation, thinking about how do we engage those end users right at the start. Two sort of brief final comments also that I think have come up in today's discussion is at IDRC we don't know what the world is going to look like in 10 years. We picked some programmatic approaches that we're thinking of doing, but we don't want to wait until 10 years from now to do an evaluation of what we've learned. So we're setting up formal opportunities to do deep dives on our work in 3 years, in 6 years, in 9 years. But we're also thinking about how can we integrate, and a little bit like I think what the speaker from the World Bank was talking about, how can we get slight steers, slight pivots in day-to-day interactions between program staff and supervisors? How can we do, a year from now, a light evaluation of what we've learned that can, again, course correct, and then we'll have the deeper dive. So an opportunity to think about as well, we always think of these big, formal, long evaluations, but what are ways to integrate quick learning into existing mechanisms and systems? And I think that the final point is, and one of the speakers mentioned this, this is a useful guide. It's broad, it establishes some broad principles, but I think the real value in the next 10 years has to come in getting into the specifics, into figuring out what are the incentives in different government workplaces where we can incentivize staff to move forward issues. How can we create the space to do evaluation, to think about what you've learned, to make the changes, etc. So it's in the actual mechanics and structure of the institutions that we're going to try and change that I think we need to focus. So thank you very much, and congratulations again on the guide.
Thank you very, very much to you, Fraser. We have taken note of your comments and suggestions, and rest assured that we are there going to enlighten our discussions and actions. I think it's time for some questions and answers. We have limited time, but we want to make the best effort. The colleague from Costa Rica, and then Nancy. Was the two of you by the moment? Maria and Chip. Okay.
Thank you so much. So
if you would like to address to one specific person, due to time constraints, we'll try to be efficient. If the the question is addressed to all of you. I would like one volunteer to deal with it.
It's more of a comment, actually.
Okay,
So,
very welcome.
my name is Sushant Naidu, and I'm the advisor at the Costa Rica Mission. I just wanted to thank you all for this event and the sessions. They've been really informative. And just talking to you individually, Satu, it was great learning more about your work. Hasim and Stefano, thank you for co-authoring this book, but especially to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland and IIED. We're really grateful to be included in this report, and even though we are a smaller mission, a lot of my colleagues couldn't be here today, but we are committed to making sure that there are systems in place in our country to make sure that the SDGs do meet the goal. As you know, we're working really hard to it, and our commitment is very strong. So once again, thank you for this.
You're very much welcome. Now, Nancy and Maria, you can go first, and then Nancy.
I think it'll be a quick one. Thank you. This is such a great guide and tool. Will be helpful for everyone. My question is for Satu, and it's about it's more of a methodological question. Like, how did you square the issue of national priorities and SDGs, and where they might not necessarily, where they do meet up and where they don't meet up? So, because I think a lot of countries are going to have the same issue with having national and sectoral plans that don't quite fit because things are underway. And I guess that'll change going forward as national plans and priorities are developed. But if you just have some advice that we could pass on, that would be interesting to me.
I wanted to pick up on two of the themes from the past, the reframing the narrative and the challenge of doing things differently, and to congratulate you and George for getting a UN agency into this space to reframe how this is done. I think this is a brilliant example of how to do it differently, how to lift up the dialogue strategically, to frame a meso-level framing for how we go about this, using demos, using a think tank, looking at foresight. You know, those are the forward-looking things that in evaluation, and that's what I meant by commissioners have a chance to do this. You have done this, so congratulations. I think this is a really good opener for how we do more of it, and to John's point of how we do this differently going forward. But I have, my question is, and maybe Satu, it's to you. I think it's really interesting you've used Kate Raworth, but you know, Johan Rockström, it's the Rockström-Raworth combination, and Rockström now, the Stockholm Resilience Center, has this big challenge to achieving the SDGs, doing it in clusters. So to Enrico, your point, we do know where we are. Johan challenges us to know where we are. I'm curious to know why you didn't put this in there in a more provocative kind of way, speaking to the issue of having more courage to step up and say, here's where we are. We are in dire straits on some of this stuff, and we need now to look at how evaluation responds in a way that can be quicker, faster, speedier. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And you need to reference Johan in this. You haven't. He's not going to be happy.
Thank you very much, and I endorse what Nancy said about the coming together of such organizations to give visibility and a push to this. My simple question was for Finland. What was the real motivation for doing this, being the first country? Where did the demand for it come? Whoever wants to answer that. How was the decision? I mean, there are other 180 countries that are just sitting there, but what triggered off the demand for this? And
for Satu.
Yes, thanks for the good questions. Starting with these national priorities and SDGs. So Finland really has a long history with sustainable development, and we had 8 national priority areas already before the 17 SDGs, and since 4 years now, we have then had 2 systems. We also have national indicators, and we have the SDG indicators, and there are, of course, reasons for that, but it is creating confusion, especially with people who are not working with these every day, and it has also created as a system now that business and CSOs are actually talking a lot about SDGs, while the Prime Minister's office is more talking about the national priorities, which is then again creating confusion. So our recommendation was to start to talk about SDGs, but to have still those priority areas, which are then more precisely prioritized for a country. Yeah, perhaps I give to Anu for the question about the motivation, because we only then did the evaluation when it was already there. Yeah.
Thank you, Siva. I don't know whether we talk about motivation, but it's our government policy that SDGs has to be evaluated at least once during the government period, meaning at every 4 years. So in last year when we completed the evaluation, we were a little bit in a hurry because we just completed before the election. So it was really the last minute we managed to do it. Thank you.
Perhaps I can quickly mention how the decision was taken in Nigeria. There was a senior government official with decision-making power who attended what we call an African-wide forum on strengthening national evaluation capacities for Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063 evidence-based reporting, organized by UNICEF and in the African Commission, UNECA. And there, in the discussions, well, the discussions were really able to motivate participants, and this senior official with strong decision-making power said, well, we would like to do, and I'm willing to initiate the discussions at the government, what kind of support I will get. So UNICEF decided to say, well, we will back you, and UNECA will also back you, and others for sure will back you. And then he started the discussions and got the buy-in. How did he get the buy-in? Only because he was a senior level official? No, because he was able, with support, to explain what difference it's going to make if they undertook an evaluation, and what it will be the losses if they don't undertake. So that discussion was taken not only at the level of the government, was expanded at some level of civil societies, development partners, and other actors, and then they decided to move ahead. And although people continue saying they are about to start, no, they have already are both evaluations 2, SDG 3 and SDG 4 in the data collection process. And they are going on very well with lots of ownership and participation, and we are promoting them to be not only visible, but other countries to learn from their challenging experience, same as we are very much motivating people to learn from the experience of Finland, that has already not only concluded, but has already run a way in terms of using evaluation findings and being influential in that way as well. So these partners, we will have a retreat in Nigeria with government representatives. We'll have this retreat to be as hands-on as possible. We'll test the guide, and we will actually be more hands-on with countries on how they can go about this evaluation, started by the political decision to take it, how to motivate that, how to trigger that, and we'll have the opportunity to be in Nigeria to learn from them and to have a Finnish delegates group that will also be there to not only participate and interact, but to eager to share their experiences with us. So that is the idea. I know that we will face several challenges, but I'm sure you have noticed that we are optimistic, that we are learning, and we are going to make it, and we are going to discuss with more countries. And we hope that in the next meeting we will have a second edition of the guidebook that will not only have the comments that you have mentioned, but will also be building in more experiences, because this guidebook is coming out based on only the experience of 3 countries by the moment. We hope that the number of experience will be larger next time. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Stefano for the concluding remarks before we close.
Well, thank you, Ada, and I mean, really, it's been a great day. We have learned a lot. It's been a great discussion, and I would like again to say a big thanks to UNICEF for hosting the launch of the guide and for being a great partner throughout the journey for EVALSDGs. A lot of the co-authors actually came from the network, and again, a lot of great ideas, not only with these guys, but during the 3 years that we've been working together. They've been very productive years. In fact, also, you know, an invitation to join EVALSDGs. To the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, of course, which has believed in this process. So remember when we had the first discussion about the event in Helsinki, and you know, there was a bit of nervousness around being able to organize a big international event, and it was a great experience, really, with people coming from literally all the continents. We had 40 people there. So yeah, I mean, thanks for everything. I think in terms of next steps, there will be, again, with other publication with EVALSDGs, and we're thinking about the next retreat in Nigeria, actually, to learn from Nigeria, and then I think we'll take it from there. So I guess the future looks like we're going to learn from each other. I hope, actually, my hope is that the guide is going to be updated fairly soon, like in a year, so we can hear more from, you know, other experiences, because really, I mean, it's based on 3 experiences. I think all we can do is to try different approaches. I would like just to say one thing. I mean, this thing around understanding national, how do we square national priority with the SDGs is the big question mark. And the reason why we wanted to have in the title is because we believe it's the elephant in the room. We cannot actually say, you know, we cannot hide the head under the sand and believe that, you know, the SDGs are just a rosy and pinky agenda. That's not true. I mean, we have to actually square that. And there are different ways of doing it. And I think what we have learned from the experiences of Finland and Nigeria is that you can look at a lot of different sources of evidence and elements of participation and processes of participation. And another way of doing it is to acknowledge that there are different interest groups. And we, you know, evaluation can play a role in actually mediating between those interest groups. I think that's what we have learned from these experiences. And again, thank you very much for coming.
Before you close, is the guidebook available online? Is there something, will be online, available to the public?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Ada, for reminding that. The guide is available online, yes. So it will be actually distributed. Thanks.
I just want to end the session with the same, probably, for the concluding remarks of Shiva in the first session, and pretending that and claiming that this guide is practical. It has some radical kind of suggestion. It is modest by all means. To the extent it is honest, I'm not sure this is for the users to judge that. Thank you so much.
And Stefano?
Final remark. Well, the guide is online, so just go and download it. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks.